everyone. Welcome to the panel discussion and closing ceremony of GSS 2015. I would request you all to put your mobile phones on silent mode or switch them off for the session. Thank you. I'm Jiantika Soni and I will be your MC for this session. For the first time, we have instituted a panel discussion in the Graduate Student Symposium as a part of GSS. So I hope that you'll like it. The panel discussion would be on the topic Life for a Research Scholar, Academia and Beyond. I would like to invite Mr. Kuldeep Singh Rajput, General Coordinator of GSS 2015 Organizing Committee, to welcome the panelists and host the panel discussion.
Thank you, Jayantika. Good evening, everyone. So I would extend my hearty welcome to all of you and thanks a lot for joining us today for this first panel discussion organized by GSS 2015. I'm Kuldeep Singh. I'm a PhD student at the Department of ECE and I'll be the moderator for today's panel discussion. So I would like to begin by asking you a question. It's not really a question, but it's a statement which was asked exactly one year prior in May 2014 at a very big career festival organized by Natures. And I want you guys to raise your hands if you agree to that statement and think that it's apt in your context. So the statement is, I love science and engineering and research, but I don't want to stay in research and academia after my PhD. Cool. As expected, because in the career event, there were like 60 postgraduates and PhDs, and out of 60, 40 agreed to the statement last year. As we know that academic jobs are shrinking and it's getting tougher and tougher, people have started to explore beyond that and start looking for non-academic positions. So today what we want to do is we want to create an open platform, open discussion platform beyond your supervisors, obviously, so that we can have make a transition in for a successful postgraduate career. So for that we have an outstanding panel with us today to share with you the lessons they learned and have this discussion ahead. So we have Dr. Gurel, who's the Chief Innovation Officer at Campus D right now, and he's also a visiting professor. He has been into, so he got his MD in medicine and then moved into research and industry. We have Dr. Sunil Kukreja, who was into research. He worked at NASA for 11 years, and then now he's at SINAPSE in the NUS. We have Professor Lim, who is the deputy head of ECE and has stayed in academia. And also we have Vincent Tan, who after his PhD did his postdoc and then again back to academia. So I think it's a good idea to start by knowing their career trajectory as to why did you choose to stay into, move into industry, and for you guys, it's why did you still stay in academia after getting your PhD, and what process did you go through for making this decision, or was there somebody who influenced this decision? So I think we can start with Prof. Teng.
I guess since I have the microphone, I So I actually studied right here in NUS from 1988 to 92, and I was a bachelor's student here. And then after that, I went away to Cambridge University to do my PhD. I finished that in about 95, and then I came back to Singapore. At that time, there was something called the Center for Wireless Communications. It's the predecessor of the Institute for Infocom Research today, I2R. At that time, CWC was very small, only about 20 people or so. As for whether I actually planned to join CWC immediately after my PhD, the answer is not really. It's just some serendipitous thing. I found out there was this thing, CWC, and while I was still a student in Cambridge, I sent in my resume. At that time, no email. I sent it in. posted it at the post office, and etc. And of course, it takes a week or two to get there, and then a week or two to get back to me. And then to my incredible surprise, within like a month or something, the letter that I got back from them was that I've been offered a job. So obviously at that time they were a bit desperate for people or something, I don't know. But anyway, I got my first job without much hassle, okay, which is, I think, not going to be the case for many of you, unfortunately. Now, it turned out quite well, so I stayed at CWC for about 5 years and did a lot of research there, got quite a number of publications, and that's the kind of thing that's important for a junior researcher, of course. And then on the back of that, those publications at that time, then applied to various schools in the US and Canada for a faculty position, just for fun, you know. It's not, again, I never do anything by planning, so it's just for fun, you know. I just thought I'd apply and see what happened. And then I got called for an interview, McGill University in Montreal. Now, I also applied to the University of Toronto, but the University of Toronto did not ask me for an interview initially. But because I was going to Montreal anyway, I said, hey, could I come over, you know, take a train over, and then, you know, you could meet me as well. So I went to both McGill and the University of Toronto, and I got job offers at both places, and then I chose the University of Toronto. So I got married at the end of year 2000, in October, okay. In November, I moved to Toronto. So I spent exactly 1 month, you know, as a married man, and then went to Toronto, and then that's basically where I developed my family. I grew my family, right? So both my kids were born in Toronto. I spent 10 years there, from 2000 to 2011. Okay. And then again, without any planning, around 2010, I don't know how many of you know the current Dean of the Faculty of Engineering, Casey Chua. So Casey was an associate at CWC at the time when I was in CWC, 95 to 2000. And then around 2009 or 2010, then I heard that he'd become the head of department at ECE. So I sent him an email or gave him a call, I don't remember, and said, hey, you know, congratulations and all of that. And he asked me, hey, have you ever thought of you know, coming back to Singapore? Now, frankly, at that point in time, I was already quite settled. I was thinking, no, I would just carry on in Toronto and live there. But because he asked that question, then I started asking myself whether I really wanted to stay in Toronto for the rest of my life. And it's a very difficult decision. I know many of you also come from other countries, you know, and you would perhaps get quite comfortable in a place and live there for a long time. But if the opportunity comes where you can return back to your home country, then would you do it or not? I mean, so I think it's always a very difficult question. Now, there's nothing wrong with Toronto. It's a wonderful place. If you ever have a chance to visit, you should. It's a really beautiful place, but don't visit in January. It's very close to Niagara Falls. I know everybody says if you go to Toronto, immediately the first thing you do is you drive 2 hours and you go to Niagara Falls. But actually the city itself is very beautiful. But anyway, the point is that, so I found myself back here.
So it was basically like you went with the flow of opportunities which came along.
Exactly. I mean, I don't think, you know, I know that many Asians in particular like to plan their lives, you know, 10 years in advance and things like that. But I don't actually believe that this is possible or healthy. I mean, you're shutting many doors if you're saying that I just want to be sure, you know, I want to go in this direction, right? So you should leave the door open to things that come your way, and then you don't know what could show up. So essentially that's my career so far, and it's been okay. Not you know, I'm not a superstar, I know, but it's been quite decent so far.
Let's hear quickly from Dr. Kukreja.
Okay. Okay. So let me see where to start. I did my undergraduate at Johns Hopkins, and had a wonderful time there. Very fantastic university in an awful city. And I grew up in Baltimore, so I know what I'm speaking of. And then I went to McGill University, so I'm very upset that Professor Tan did not accept the offer there. So I did my PhD in biomedical engineering. My undergraduate was in electrical engineering. And then after McGill, I went to Sweden to work with a very famous group in system identification. And then I came back to Montreal, to the Montreal Neurological Institute, worked there, second postdoc, and then out of sheer accident, I ended up at NASA in California. And I was there for about 11 years, or a little bit over 11 years. And now presently in SINAPSE as of last month. So the trajectory was kind of varied and accidental, as Professor Tan points out. Professor Lin, sorry. It was just out of sheer coincidence that I ended up at NASA. A lot of very interesting projects that I worked on, but life at a government agency, especially one that's involved in aeronautics, gets into national security and other things that I'm sure you guys can imagine. And life is not very free. You're not free to travel. You're not free to publish. In fact, publications are highly discouraged. So then I ran into Professor Tucker, one of my professors from Johns Hopkins, at a conference a few years ago in San Diego, and he told me he had just recently been appointed, or was about to be appointed, as the director of SINAPSE. Then we got into email conversation about would I like to join SINAPSE and would I like to relocate myself and family to Singapore. And I thought it was a fantastic opportunity. Singapore is the only country that I know of in the world that lavishes so much money on research, and the infrastructure and facilities here are by far better than any other country that I've seen in Europe and US and Canada. So it's a great research opportunity. I'm very happy to be here, and people should go and explore the world. You might end up in your home country or back in Singapore. Any questions?
Sure. So let's move on. Let's hear from
So my name is Vincent Tan. I recognize a few faces in the audience. I think I've taught a few people. So I am a Singaporean. I grew up here. I did my studies up to junior college here. Then of course, as with every Singaporean male, you have to go through the army. So I went through 2.5 years, over 2 spells. After the first spell in the army, I went to Cambridge University to do my undergraduate studies in electrical and information sciences. Then I came back to Singapore to complete the remaining obligation to the Singapore Armed Forces. And then I moved to the other Cambridge, MIT, to pursue my PhD degree. Following that, I did a 1-year postdoc at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. Then I had to come back to Singapore because of my obligation to the country, since they paid for my education. So I came back and I worked as a research scientist for a couple of years at the Institute for Infocom Research, I2R. During that time, I was also appointed as an adjunct assistant professor here, and I taught a few classes in communication theory, probability, things like that. So since the start of 2014, I have been a full-time faculty member here in ECE as well as mathematics. So well, that's my history. So I have been to many places, but it's great to be back home. This is where I am starting to grow my family. I have a very active 2-year-old, and yeah, that's the most fun part of my life. I still love to write and publish papers, and that's why I'm in this job. I don't think there is any other job in the world that can allow you to publish and write papers freely while you're getting paid. So that's why I chose this career.
Right, cool. And it was more of obligation than Singapore rules which brought you back. Yeah. Cool. So let's hear from Dr. Gurel. He was into medicine, got his MD in medicine, moved into industry, and he has lots of startup experiences as well. So, Dr. Gurel.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be back, and I really appreciated the opportunity yesterday to give a keynote. I think all of you already know my background, so I won't bore you with those details. As Kuldeep mentioned, I have a medical degree. I was involved in clinical medicine. I was doing research. I did consulting in the hedge fund and investment banking realm. I've been in industry, so all different aspects. So I have a little bit of a strange history. But I wanted to get to the question that you asked from Nature magazine. Can you repeat that question?
So let me repeat the statement.
The statement, yeah.
It says, I love science, engineering, and research, but I don't want to stay in research and academia after my PhD.
Right. So one of the interesting things, I don't think that that's a very, I think the question is too simplistic. So I went into hedge funds, for example. I went into Samsung. I went into clinical medicine. And I've always been interested in research. And I think it's sometimes they look at these decisions as either or. You're going to do your PhD in high-level research, and then you're going to go and do sell real estate, or something like that. Maybe that's extreme, but I think in general, that's not the way things happen. And so I would encourage people not to think of this as the dark side. Sometimes the researchers say going to industry is the dark side. And at the same rate, not to necessarily say that academia is the perfect environment. And we are the purists and the true people in the industry is not, and so forth. And I think that one advice I would give is to look at this more in a nuanced way, not either or. The second thing I would like to say that is related to, I hope, the question and certainly my career. As you know, I've been committed with a specific idea for the past 25 years. And I consider that to be a blessing, because a lot of people are looking for a purpose or meaning in life and so forth. And this has really driven a lot of my decisions, which may seem unusual. It's not planned. It's just some inspiration idea around which I try to advance. And so there's some very famous people who have given advice in all fields, not just research. And one of the most important common themes in that advice is try to find that purpose. And so you find those in Nobel laureates, you find great businessmen, you find great politicians. Well, the fields are very different, but they achieve success and meaningful impact because there's one thing that they wanted to understand. For a scientist, one thing that they wanted to accomplish. And sometimes, if you have that idea, it may take some research to get it done. It may take some industry to get it done. It may take some politics, maybe I'll become a politician at some point, to get it done. So it's what your passion is and what your purpose is that should drive, rather than the arbitrary definition that I want to be in academia or I want to be in industry. I want to mention one third thing, is that how many people here believe that Albert Einstein was one of the most brilliant scientists or geniuses in science? Okay.
How am I sorry?
Now, I regard myself as doing innovation. I always try to take the contrarian view. I think even more than a genius scientist, he was a genius marketer, as in the business sense. And marketing has two sides. Some of you might be familiar from the business. Marketing is learning from the outside, the market. What do the consumers want? What does the market want to develop a product? The other part of marketing is to be able to impact and influence those consumer decisions and consumer behavior and perception. He was brilliant on both of those. So I'll explain very quickly. I won't go too long.
I'll leave it.
Okay, 1 minute. So I'll explain very quickly. So you remember when Einstein came up with his relativity, he was working as a patent clerk in the Swiss patent office, not an academic job. And the Swiss have very on-time trains, kind of like Singapore, right? Or on-time transportation. So everything has to be on time. So in 1905, when he was doing these patent applications, everybody is doing these patents on how to synchronize clocks. And he's seeing this. He's seeing what are the problems in society that they're trying to solve, and all the patents are coming in. And he's thinking, what does it mean to synchronize clocks? What does that really mean? And then, of course, he comes up with his relativity. Now, the other thing, the marketing side of the communication, I think one of the most important skills to have if you want to go into industry or any area is the communication. As you know, relativity, the fundamental concept is the invariance of the laws of physics in any frame of reference. Invariance is the fundamental concept, and the relativity of space and time are derivative, or they come out of that invariance. And the original formulation of his relativity was invariant theory. But then he realized it's much more sexy, much more glamorous to call it relativity. Because you had the Lorentz transformations beforehand, he was not really the first. So he calls it relativity, and everyone captures the imagination, and this brilliant marketer is now transformed into a brilliant scientist.
So what I understand is for academia and academic jobs, after you finish your PhD, you really require a postdoc position or work in some research labs to get a feel of research and the academia environment. So what advice do you give to us before we choose our postdoc lab after our PhD? Is there something specific we need to look for, or is there any kind of process did you go through before choosing your postdoc labs? Because what I have seen is I have few friends who, a friend for instance, he did his PhD in mechanical engineering, and now he went back to MIT to do his postdoc in a totally different field of molecular biology. So do you think this kind of shift is ideal, or it's good to be in one field and master over that, or what kind of things should a PhD student look for before he chooses his lab?
What I tell the students in SINAPSE, and Abhishek sitting up there can testify to this, that I think the best way, and the way I got my postdoctoral position at a very renowned research group in Sweden, was going to conferences.
Right.
So conferences is where you advertise yourself. Just out of sheer luck, my postdoctoral advisor, Leonard Joon, happened to be working on the same thing I was working on, something called bootstrap theory. It was very sexy back some years ago. And so he came to my talk, and then we talked afterwards, and he offered me a postdoctoral position. That is the best way. If you write papers and you're publishing, that's great, but no one knows your name or your face. And so if you go out to conferences, you should make it a point to go and talk to people. Networking does work, does help tremendously. If you're writing papers, so people might think it's interesting, but very rarely will they contact you on their own. So go to conferences and talk to people is the best way.
So networking is the best thing according to you for a postdoc or probably even academic.
Even this position. I kept in touch with Professor Thakur whenever I saw him at IEEE EMBS conference over the years. And then I met him again many years later at the same conference. And that's how I ended up here.
Cool.
Yeah, it's very good to, it's very important to maintain your contacts in your academic research community. Now, as for whether you should move from mechanical engineering to molecular biology, I would say that's a very big risk. I think that, of course, as a researcher advances in sort of a career, you need to move from one area to another. You can't just stay put in one very narrowly defined field. But you have to be careful not to just throw away whatever you've already learned and then just go and do something completely different. So you you want to move to an adjacent area. You want to try to apply what you have already studied and then move it to a new application. And then when you do that, you learn about other techniques. And then when you do that, then you grow your field of knowledge, right? So I think that's the ideal way to move around, right? And you should try to do that. But of course, it's perhaps easier said than done. Sometimes you have to find a job, and so you might not have all that much choice. But ideally, this is what you should aim for.
So Dr. Vincent, according to you, like for example, for all those who want to get into academic job, what advice do you give them? Is it just doing your great PhD, getting a number of publications, networking is the same? What else do you think is crucial to get land into an academic position?
Well, academic positions these days are few and far between. That is fact. So in order to stand out, you have to do whatever you mentioned and more. Often you need 1 or 2 postdoctoral positions in adjacent fields, not completely far off. For myself, I did a PhD in signal processing, machine learning, and I use information theoretic techniques to analyze some algorithms in my PhD. And then I moved into information theory, which is not too far off. Okay, I think that one shouldn't move completely away from his or her expertise because there's this thing called tenure for junior faculty members, and you need recommendation letters from people in your community. And if you pop from one community to another, then it will be difficult to maintain contacts with people that you know very well. My advice to aspiring faculty members is to publish extensively, publish well, not too many, but of high quality. Talk to people, you need to know people, and when you apply to faculty positions, rarely do you get a position by just uploading your CV and hoping for good news. You need to, get to know people, get to know what positions are available, and to put it bluntly, sometimes you need to go through the back door. So try all sorts of means possible, stay passionate about what you are doing, and work hard.
So Dr. Gurel, so as you know, there are plenty of non-academic jobs these days, and most of the students are wondering there. Maybe. So what, according to you, are some of the skill sets what industry is looking for if some of us plan to move into a non-academic background, or what skill set do you think we should incorporate and build during this phase of our PhD?
So I've had the opportunity to interact with many different types of professionals, doctors, lawyers, business people, finance people, researchers, etc. The PhD, and I've done graduate level work, I do not have a PhD, but the PhD is a very special experience that has a lot of strengths and also certain challenges when it comes to work that is outside of research. And again, as I mentioned, it's not like black and white. But that being said, there is something very special about the PhD, and that is the mindset and skill set and experience of deeply focusing on one subject and pushing the boundary of that one subject to the maximum possible, and of course, ideally, more than anyone else in the world, and historically, in your respective fields, to really push that. And it's very focused. But most of what happens in the real world is highly broad, much broader. So so your PhD has advantages and disadvantages. And any disadvantage can be handled if you're aware of that disadvantage. And so when you go into industry or any other non-academic place, and you bring that same mindset of deep focus and expect people to say, wow, he's so smart. It may not necessarily be the best strategy. So I think that you should But at the same rate, I should say that your capability of doing that intense research, solving a problem beyond what is expected, etc., I think that's also a strength. So you should realize that, and I think the skill set that you want to develop is some of the broader thinking outside of that area. And I'm not just talking about knowledge base, but just the capability of not just to look at the deep focus area, but to look at things from many different angles. That's what I've seen when I see PhDs going into non-academic positions.
Without getting much into deeper,
Without getting
deep, yeah, much deep. So the key takeaway would be like it's really important to us, for us to ask ourselves, do we really need this PhD to land in a specific job, or do we need this PhD to really get into academic career? And if the answer is yes to each of them, the journey can be completely different. So with this, I would leave it open to our audience to pitch in questions, and we can have an interactive session.
Maybe I can start. What do you think about, quite a lot of people are saying that there's oversupply of PhDs. About that. I'll give you an example. They were saying that in the US, PhD unemployment has risen by something, I think it was 30% in the past 10 years. And this is only going to get worse. So in that frame of mind, would you still recommend a lot of people to do a PhD?
Well, that's because the U.S. has become highly uncompetitive, and a lot of the high-tech jobs may remain there, but they're slowly starting to shift. So there is actually a critical shortage of highly qualified people. So there might be a lot of PhDs, but where do these people graduate from? So I'm looking to hire people, but I'm very selective of who I'm going to hire, and I'm sure the other faculty here are the same way. So this media hype that there's oversupply of PhDs might be true generally, but not for well-qualified. And if you have a PhD from NUS, you will be highly sought after. So that's not to worry coming from the right universities. Trust me.
That's a good news, actually. So it really depends on.
Yeah.
So do you think even for a postdoc, it depends on which university you go and do your postdoc, or it's like it depends on the lab which you go?
Well, both. You need to be from the right university to be offered a position in the right lab. If you do not go to the right, it's pedigree.
It's all linked, a chain.
Pedigree.
Sure.
Yeah, I mean, the question of the oversupply is something like this. I mean, I think industry, especially maybe in Singapore in particular, they don't realize that they really need a PhD. They think they just need a bachelor's graduate, but in fact they really need a PhD. Like, just to give you an example, I just saw an email the other day that came from ST Engineering to Singapore Technologies. And it says that, oh, we're looking for somebody, who's able to do something about the flight control of a UAV, and also, a vision-based navigation, and they're trying to basically solve a problem for the police force, where basically the idea is you fly a UAV, and then over a crowd, maybe there's a riot going on, and they want to try to identify the people who are making trouble. Okay, and they want a bachelor's degree holder. I mean, it's absurd, right? So basically, some of these companies, they want very high-tech solutions, people with very particular skills, and they don't realize that what they're looking for is really a PhD. So the oversupply, the flip side of that is that the demand is off, right? So industry has to recognize that it needs to hire a lot of PhDs. Then in that case, there will no longer be an oversupply. Now, and then on your side, if all of you guys are thinking, oh, I just want an academic job, then yes, there is no oversupply of PhDs, because how many academic jobs can there be, right? I mean, if you go back to your home country of China and India, where university education is still expanding, then I think there's no problem finding a faculty position. When you go to the developed world, where the proportion of graduates in the population is already at 30, 40, 50%, then university education is not not growing anymore. The only way you can get a faculty position is when somebody dies or retires. so just imagine that. There's not a lot of those openings, right? So every one of us is around for like 30 years in our career, and over these 30 years, you train like 30 PhD students. So the chances of getting a faculty position is approximately 1 in 30. So it's not a realistic goal to say I want only an academic position, unless you're willing to go back to your respective home countries, which is not necessarily a bad thing. I mean, you go and you go back to Italy or China or Iran, it's possible to get a faculty position.
It's okay, go ahead. Sometimes we get suspicious of the research topic we're working on right now because it will definitely affect our future position. So maybe there are two ways, like we can just focus on what we're given, or we keep, continue to be suspicious and for the other areas. Do you have another advice?
So if you feel suspicious about your current research topic, you need to know that you don't just focus on one thing for the entire duration of your PhD, but you can do multiple things. So you may feel suspicious of one, and you come up with a topic that you feel comfortable with for the remainder of your PhD. And then at least you have something that you don't feel suspicious about. Now, you don't immediately, typically, people do not immediately apply for positions right after their PhDs unless they have proved a major theorem. You probably need to diversify a little. That's the whole point of a postdoc. A postdoc position allows you to interact with another faculty member, allows you to be exposed to another slightly different topic, and allows you to demonstrate your research independence beyond your PhD advisor. And that is when you can develop a more diverse research profile with less suspicion. Yeah? So you can also suggest your own topics then.
I think that's a very good question. I was a little bit suspicious of the use of the term suspicious. So, coming from Asian culture, I guess you're being diplomatic. But I sense what you're getting at, and I'll give you a little story why I don't have a PhD. I was actually in the MD PhD program in the United States, and that's funded by the NIH, and it was a great honor to be in that program. And I spent a lot of years doing my PhD and got a lot out of that. I was in Wayne Hendrickson's lab, X-ray crystallography. And my first project, which I had worked on for about a year, 2 years, was scooped. And it was scooped by 2 other labs, literally when I'm about to get ready for publication. So that was 2 years that some people would say was wasted. But I really learned a lot, and I developed my scientific maturity, and these are things that even if the project is suspicious, you may want to think about developing other things. And then my second project was working with a industrial company, a biopharma company. And as you know, working with industry, there's a lot of legal stuff. They have to get the material. There's legal documents. So for 3 years, this was all hung up with the lawyers. So my PhD progress was being determined by the lawyers. So I decided that I had spent 5 years in this work, and that I would just move on and get the MD. But I kept very good relations with Wayne Hendrickson, my advisor, and I continued to do research, as I mentioned. But the point being, which is related to what Dr. Tan was saying, I learned a very important lesson, that I needed to, number one, take more active control of my future and do what I wanted to do. And that's one reason why I got a renewed conviction on my idea. And number two, like Dr. Tan said, is to diversify. Maybe I was too extreme. My career is very diverse, as you know. But I've done many different things. And so that very difficult experience as a PhD student turned out to be very positive for me as how I've structured my decision making and what I've done since then. But I think diversification is actually very important.
Jen.
I have a question. Prof, Dr. Gurel mentioned about the purpose of life, like we need to find it. I believe in that too. But do all of you feel that industry sometimes imposes the purpose of life? Like it gives you specific projects which you have to do on certain deadlines. Whereas in academia, you might have an option of expanding your horizons. I'd like to hear your comments on
Then, anyone can pitch in.
that. Yes.
Well, I've worked in the industry, I've worked, and I think Sunil was mentioning this, we were working at NASA. You do have lots of constraints when you're working. You have lots of constraints when you're working at the industry or NASA. But I think that I forget who in the group mentioned this. You mentioned the back door, you mentioned the serendipity. But I think if you have a purpose and a goal, you don't just go with the flow. You find innovative ways to get things done. I'll give you a little example. I don't want to give too much details, but basically, when I was at Samsung, I was in the CTO office. That's a strategy and planning office. And it's a complicated politics, but the CTO office is essentially overseeing the labs. And we're not really supposed to be doing research. But my philosophy, I like to do research. And I actually think that the people doing the strategy should be engaged in the research, so I had a sort of difference with people. But that's okay. So I actually was engaged very closely in some research where I was conceiving of ideas, planning experiments, writing the paper, going through the logic, and so I was essentially a co-author on these papers. And my boss, who's in the strategy team, executive vice president, said, you can't publish that paper, or you can't be a co-author. And the reason was that he would have to approve that, and if something strange happened or whatever, they'd say, oh, you're doing research, you're not supposed to do it. So he said, you're not going to be a co-author. So I thought about it, and I said, well, actually this was research with the outside lab. I will talk to one of the researchers, and I will get him to be involved in the lab. And the line of approval will go through his boss, which is in the research side. And that's how we're going to get approval. So I was able to publish those papers. But if I had just followed, the standard path, I would have serious constraints. So if you have a purpose and you just think about ways to accomplish that, which may not be obvious, I think you can get over that constraints. Obviously, you have to follow the rules and everything, but you have to think creative.
And I think of that also that you said that faculty members in academia, does it work? Okay. I mean, Jayantika said that in academia you're free to do what you want. I mean, that's actually not true. So I'm sorry to burst your bubble, but it's not true. There are also many constraints, and there are also many demands on your time. So there are courses you have to teach, and you don't get to always teach the courses that you really like to teach. Right? And so sometimes you're asked to teach some other stuff, right? So I've in my career taught the circuit theory as well as communications, as well as probability, as well as signal processing. I mean, there's a whole bunch of things that I'm taught, not necessarily those that really wanted to. And not only the teaching, but on the research side, and then increasingly especially, funding agencies in government and elsewhere demand that you have, that you focus on certain themes. And at certain times of the decade or century, I mean, you would be focusing on something or other. And so, you're interested in topic A, but then that is not necessarily the thing that is obviously going to be funded. And so you have to make sure that your topic A fits into theme number one, right? That is highest priority, in the country at that time. So actually, it's not so clear cut that in academia you have a great deal of freedom, but you should have some core competencies, some core interests, and then you try to apply that to the application that is of interest at that point in time, and then so it has to be something along those lines. It cannot be that I'm purely interested in this topic, and then when I write my proposal, I only propose some very deep thing that nobody will even understand, and then no, look how impressive it is. I have so many equations, but it doesn't work. Okay, so this is not going to work, right? So you have to take that and say, okay, I'm able to apply it in a certain way, right? And that's the.
So I can actually follow up on that. So Dr. Lim mentioned a very interesting point. In academia, you actually don't have as much freedom compared to what might be the perception as in industry. There are different sorts of constraints. So if you have an idea and you really want to pursue it, and you're lucky enough in a certain academic setting to do that, that's good. But generally, as Dr. Lim mentioned, there are constraints. But especially now, maybe not 100 years before or in the last century, now, if you really have an idea and you want to get it done, the way to do it is launch your own business. So that's one reason why I'm keen to do a startup around my idea. But at the same rate, ultimately you will be responsible to investors and so forth. And that leads to a very interesting paradox, is that the current venture capital model requires you to focus. When you get the funding, you have to focus on that. So you can't shift around. So there are also even constraints there. But the bottom line is, you really believe something, get the academic and scientific training, and then launch a startup.
Any more questions? Let's have two more. Yeah.
Thank you very much for sharing. I think all of the panelists have been around the world conducting research work, including Europe, North America, Asia, and I'd like to ask whether you could share with us whether you have experienced differences in research cultures at these various places, and if you have, what have these experiences?
Dr. Kukreja, do you want to answer this? Yeah. I mean, we would love to know your experience in NASA 11 years. So it would be good to know.
Well, the biggest difference that I've seen so far, but my view so far is quite limited, is that here at NUS and Asian culture in general, people don't talk to each other. And that's not a good way to do research. You can't just sit there at your bench or in your cubicle and shut out the rest of the world. Because getting up and talking to your colleagues, even though they might not be doing the same thing, talking to them, you might see that there's a lot of commonalities in your work, and you might actually get inspired and have a breakthrough in your research doing that. And in Europe, the culture is similar. You talk to your colleagues, and you obviously you do your work. I'm not talking about going and talking all day. There's a big difference. And
It might happen.
And the other thing is that people do talk and have social conversations at work. Here in Asia, there seems to be a hesitance to talk to people, but you guys still take breaks. I mean, I walk around and I've noticed everyone's sitting there watching TV on their iPhones. Or smartphones, not necessarily Samsung.
I think marketing is very important.
He's promoting Samsung. Beware.
I'm a marketer. Maybe not Einstein, but marketing.
And then in Canada it was the same, highly collaborative. And that's one of the goals of SINAPSE, advertising here for SINAPSE. If you guys are looking for RF positions, come and talk to me or email me. We're trying to set up a highly collaborative environment that's highly stimulating, that will lead to hopefully groundbreaking research and translation. And this is the type of culture that really needs to be adhere to and the students here should learn. And I don't see that here, or maybe like I said, my time here has been limited, but so far I have not seen it. At NASA, it was also highly collaborative, although the work is highly it's not openly available to public, and due to that, there is a certain amount of collaboration you can or cannot do. I lost touch with a large part of my community going to NASA because all my education, at least my graduate education, was done outside the U.S., so having communications or collaboration with anyone outside the U.S. was not just difficult, it was just not allowed. So academia does have its benefits. There are constraints, but in government, at least in the United States, I think the Singapore government here is highly collaborative. From what I've seen so far, that your life becomes very restricted and constrained, and it might be sort of fun and sexy at first, but it gets very difficult to live your life in a concealed manner. Did I answer?
Yeah. Last question. Let's wind up with the last question. Yeah.
I'm also suspicious about one fact raised by our PhD students in engineering. In PhD study, I think there currently like a trend that the PhD students are required to both accomplish at developing some new theories, and also they must be trained to be trained with some engineering skills. So one difficulty I personally face is sometimes I can think very fast, but I'm constrained by the engineering skills. So according to your experience, what's the balance and what's the standard you use balances to conflicting factors?
I'm not sure why it's conflicting that the engineering skills and doing well in your PhD. I mean, so you're supposed to develop your engineering skills, and that should help you to do a good PhD, right? So it cannot be that your PhD is all completely non-engineering related. I mean, you're in the engineering department, right? So I think what you're saying is that certain groups, of course I know these groups. Within our department, they focus a lot on prototyping new things, right? Like Vincent's group on prototyping UAVs and prototyping various kinds of robots and so on. And sometimes, you know, the projects that they get funded on require them to deliver certain things, and they make use of PhD students in order to do that. Now, of course, you should help out in doing those things, but I think, you know, if it gets to be too much of that, and you feel that the work will not contribute to your PhD thesis, then you should say something to your supervisor. I think a lot of times I find, you know, after I stepped into this position of deputy head, I suddenly had all these students coming to me and talking about their problems. Now, you can ask my students, right? So when I talk to my students, I just talk. You know, it's not. I don't try and put up a barrier and say, you know, I'm the master and you're the slave, right? But it seems to me that there are some students who come to me and say that they cannot talk to their supervisors in an honest way, an open, honest way. That they feel that the supervisor is just dictating to them, you do this week and then this thing next week and then so on and so forth. Now, if that happens, I mean, actually, that's not the way your supervisor is supposed to operate. Now, it's not for me to say exactly how people are supposed to supervise their students. People have different styles, right? So you have your own, concerns and you have your own feelings about the matter. You should bring it up, right? You should bring up to your supervisor if you have a problem like this. Okay, you should bring it up. And you say that I'm working too much on your robot. Okay, now I need to do more on the theory of the robot. Okay, then that's something that you should try to bring up to your supervisor. The supervisor is not entitled to tell you to do things and expect you to obey him unconditionally. That's not the way it's supposed to be. Okay, right, we're good?
I have one comment to make about that from the perspective of medical education. I think it's very important if you're in an engineering school. Again, I'm not the engineer, but I think you certainly want to, and I know there may be political things related to funding and whatnot, why things are happening, but all that aside, I think that it's important to get a broad-based aspects of both the hard technology, the engineering skills, as it were, the theory. As the PhD progresses, you get more and more focused. So I think that there is value to, even if you want to be a theoretician, to have had exposure and experience with that engineering. And I give the example from medical school. Let's say you went and you had a knee injury, you went to orthopedic surgery. And this orthopedic surgeon went to medical school, but they decided they would not take any biochemistry, physiology, pharmacology, obstetrics, cardiology. They wouldn't do anything but orthopedic surgery. Now that would be a problem, because the doctor needs to know all of these things. So I think I was very suspicious, that's a much used term, of those medical students that said, I want to be an orthopedic surgeon, and that's my dream, and I'm not going to study really hard the other stuff. Maybe, again, like you said, it's not up to me to judge them, but I never felt that they would truly be... Anyway, I guess I should finish. So I think a broad-based education is very important. Thank you.
All right. I'd like to thank our fantastic panel members for joining us, and thanks to you guys for being interactive. Back to Chair Tika.